Why don't you curse?
Oh, well, it's, I will say this. I don't think I like never curse. So sometimes it happens, but it's pretty rare. So if I'm more mindful and conscious, like I don't curse because I used to a lot, born and raised in New York City, literally Manhattan. So I used to curse like a pirate, played sports. That was a thing. But why do we call it a curse word? I started thinking into like why it's called a curse. And I read this book, incredible book called Word Magic. And it's a really dense book, but a very thin book. It went into the complete breakdown of the English language, literally, like the original meaning of words. And after that, it changed my life. I read it maybe 5 times because it's just something good to remind yourself of. So I just stopped cursing as much because I just realized how powerful these words are. That's all. I think the English language from just a vibrational level is pretty low, and we don't need to make it worse,
Yeah, that's so interesting because words are a spell. So do you think curses invite in negative energy?
Of course they do. Also, it makes you just not know how to speak. I realized when I started to be more mindful of it that I used it a lot, especially in situations where I was frustrated and I just didn't really know how to feel. And so when you have to insert something else, you actually have to describe how you're feeling.
That's a really good point.
It's true because most people just say, bleep, and that's it. And like that in itself has some sort of meaning. Mm-hmm. But what is it that you feel?
Sometimes I use it for emphasis, to really emphasize how I'm feeling.
Yeah, because you can't really bold or italics or underline. What about through like body language or through pacing or through, emphasizing just from your inflections?
I mean, I definitely think about that as well. I have been much more cognizant of the way I speak, mostly in terms of filler words. I believe if you eliminate those words, like, and things like that, you're much more respected. It's a subconscious thing, but people are far more in tune with what you're saying.
Yeah. When you speak slower, also, like the way that I am, people tend to listen to you more.
Yeah,
Then if you're speaking really fast and you're talking like this, because, if something's really important, then I probably should speak a little bit lower and slower. So, yeah, there's a whole art to it. And I wouldn't say that I know all about it, but I've also been kind of practicing. But you've done amazing since, 6 years, right?
6
I remember
years.
when we first met and you just had all these kind of desires and ideas, and now you're putting them into action. So that's really cool to see.
It took a while. I had to find my own medium, but I think I found my lane.
It's constantly like a death and rebirth, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Seriously, because it's almost like you really kind of have to get very comfortable with yourself before you do this, and every single time you grow, it shows in the direction in which you're taking things in life.
I was listening to Modern Wisdom, which is one of my favorite podcasts, and they were talking about the fear of perception. A lot of people don't post content. I mean, I always think about it in a social media lens because that's my field, but the fear of perception can fall into basically any aspect of life. But I'm going to speak about it.
But it's pretty loud in the field of social media.
Yes, obviously, because there's a possibility that you post a video and suddenly you have millions of eyeballs on you. That's a real possibility.
Absolutely.
If you post a good video. So people are terrified of being seen in that regard. And what this podcast was talking about is how the fear of perception is a goalpost that moves back and back. But we don't know if it ever really goes away.
Never.
My fear of perception is pretty low at this point. My tolerance is very high because I make it a non-negotiable for me to post every single day. I care more about getting a video live than I care about my own fear of perception. But there are still some things that I'm afraid of speaking about on camera. There's still some things that I'm afraid other people might think of me. But the goalpost keeps moving back and back and back.
Yeah.
It never really goes away. It just gets smaller.
Yeah, and I think that's a good thing. So perception drives every single thing. Our thoughts, our behavior, the way that we see other people, who we like, who we choose to date. That's how our brains work. It's on perception, quite literally. All of reality is a perception. Mm-hmm. Every single thing is a perception. So perceptions are not real, right? Because perceptions they can change so easily. But I think there's a good side and a downside, right? The downside obviously is so many people aren't themselves. They're not honest with themselves, and therefore they're not fully honest with the world and the people that they love because they're afraid of what other people will think, right? But I think that there are some good things about that too. I mean, you're more mindful about the words that you speak. You know, you want to speak in a certain way that'll allow people from various backgrounds and understandings to understand what you're saying. That's because of perception too. Yeah,
that is a good point. It is a perception.
And also brand. Brand is what you feel and think of when you like hear a company name, right? Or a person. You're a brand. This is a brand. It's a brand, right? What is a brand? A brand isn't just, you know, like the ways you're commercializing. Like a brand is the essence. It's the energy and the essence of a person or a company. So that's all perception. PR is perception, and it's incredibly powerful of a driver. Now, I think the beauty is like when you care less and less about it, the perception increases. Like people start to like you because they see you as more human, right? So it's like the less you care about perception, the better your perception is.
You've got the dichotomy at play there. But as you were talking, I had this thought. I try to be hyper self-aware. Again, communication is one of the most important values. I think it's one of the most important skill sets a person can develop over time. And it's not something that you're stuck with. You're not stuck with a lack of communication skills. This is something that you can develop over time.
Yeah.
We are humans. We're constantly speaking. It's a practice that you can go into quite literally every single day. But as you were speaking, I was like, I wonder if it's selfish. I want to communicate in the best possible way because I think what I'm saying deserves to be heard. So is that a selfish thing, or is it not a selfish thing because what I'm saying provides value?
I guess it depends on what you think selfish means. Selfish. Selfish has not a great connotation to it. People don't necessarily think that selfish is a good thing, but what does selfish mean to them? Does selfish mean that someone cares about a certain aspect of themselves over a certain aspect of them? If so, isn't that selfish of them? Right? So it's just this interesting thing. I think the self-growth entire avenue and category could be seen as selfish, but that's all I care about. My whole life is about self-improvement, but it's not self-improvement just for me to benefit. You realize that you being a better person helps everybody.
It helps the people around you.
It helps the people around you.
Mm-hmm. It helps the people that you touch.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because you want to be a more truer form of yourself. Mm-hmm. Because then maybe you'll mitigate the number of conflicts that you get into, misunderstandings, or maybe you'll attract a better compatible partner. Mm. These are all good things.
Yeah, those are all good things. They say you have to become the perfect person in order to attract the perfect person. Obviously, I'm using perfect.
Yeah.
For lack of a better term, nobody's perfect. We're all human. We're all flawed. But if you're looking for specific qualities in a person and you don't possess those qualities, I find it very difficult to attract that type of person because what are you going to provide to them? Because they're probably also looking for those same qualities.
And I think qualities are probably like minimum, right? We're talking just like values. And there's certain values that you have to embody in order to attract someone who also embodies those same characteristics when it comes to value system. Transparency, honesty, faithfulness, right? If you're in a monogamous relationship, all these types of things, loyalty, you should embody those principles if you want to attract someone else who has those principles. Otherwise, I've always dated people that were fairly opposite of me, but not in value system. Same value system, but we look like yin and yang. But I love that. I like a difference. I love that. You know, I like someone who's a little bit more, I'd say, watery, right? A little bit more, kind of, because I'm fairly structured, but I'm also very metaphysical. Like I've got a very, I'm actually very wild on the inside and I come off very structured on the outside, because I am, but I also have this very wild free spirit.
I would agree. I would say the same thing for myself. Can you discuss your idea of yin and yang?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yin and yang. I think about the whole world in that way. So I don't like the terms masculine and feminine, only because I think they're being used incorrectly. So I think masculine and feminine, they definitely have a definition, but that definition, if you really think about it, when you think of the word masculine, when you think of the word feminine, you have some sort of association in your mind, and you can't help it. And that certain association has kind of an aesthetic. It has a 3D kind of representation. It has a form. It has a form, right? And so I think masculine and feminine should be used in those ways. Maybe it's more of a form, like someone who dresses this way, or, it's a little bit of a...
More physical.
It's a more physical, exactly. Versus yin and yang is less physical. It's more energetic. And when you're talking about energies, which a lot of people, when they use masculine and feminine, they're trying to talk about energy. It just doesn't work because it doesn't fit. Energy is genderless, is characteristic, less, right? It doesn't have a form. So yin is inwards. It's very fluid, but it's very dark. Yin is dark. This is why yin is black in the yin yang symbol. It's the black side. Yin is, they say it's stillness, right? Yin is stillness, but if you think about yin and being still, like meditation or just being very calm, and you can think about how much effort it takes and how much discipline it takes to be still.
Stoic.
And how much discipline it takes to be calm in situations where you may not want to be calm. You can see how yang plays in then, right? Because yang is more action-oriented. It's more direction. It's more singular. And it's the light part. It's the white part of the yin and yang, right? And so think of yang energy as like, kind of really like a power energy, right? And yin as more of a fluid energy, right? It's more of an inwards energy. So if you think about death and rebirth, like the deconstruction, that's a very yin process. You're going inside yourself, and rebirth, right? You're kind of rebirthing these new actions, these new habits, and you're creating a new life. That's very yang. So I always talk about, when you have intuition is like through your yin, right? It's through yin, it's through stillness, it's through going inside that you really catch up to your intuition and can start to speak to yourself. And then you have to act on it, right? So that's where the yang comes in. You have to act on it, because if you don't act on your intuition, it just goes away. So yin and yang is such a beautiful interplay of how, these two dualities come together and create this non-dual relationship.
What would categorize yin and yang in terms of masculine and feminine, if you were to redefine those two?
Well, masculine and feminine is different than yin and yang.
It's different. Okay.
Yeah. So, but yin would be like a little bit more of like what people would think of as the feminine.
Yes.
Right? People would think of as feminine qualities. That's what they would think of as yin. My point is, it takes a lot of yang to understand your yin, right? Because it takes a lot of yang, AKA it takes a lot of effort, takes a lot of action, takes a lot of energy, right? And power to remain still. So it just it takes each other to kind of understand what the other side is. So when you're, I guess, in masculine, feminine terms, the reason why I think it's hard for me to describe it in that way is because people still have their associations with like masculine as more manly, and it's just not. It's just not that. It has nothing to do with manliness. It genuinely has nothing to do with manliness. Like yang, if you think of a mothers have a ton of yang energy. So, they have a ton of, they're protectors. They're doing tons of action. God knows they're not sitting around and meditating. So mothers have a lot of yang. They have a lot of fire, like the fire element. But in the world of masculine and feminine, I guess people would say that being a mother is more feminine. But no, not really. Like femininity has a lot of power and fire behind it. Some people don't understand that. If you look at ancient cultures and traditions, you've got all of these female deities that have a ton of power and fire, like Kali, Hecate, right? All of these like female figures. There's a lot of yang, like that's in women inherently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Look at you. There's a lot of yang.
There's a lot of yang. Yes, exactly. I have very naturally, I have a lot of yang energy. Like the career world was fairly easy for me, right? Because I just action, execution, this strategy, those types of yang were very easy for me. Yin was something I needed to cultivate more in my life. And when I did, I became more embodied in the yang, right? The yang became more pure.
We're living in a very interesting time frame. Because one of my favorite ways you describe yourself is a straight man living in this body.
Yes.
But we're living in a very interesting time because I think, I don't want to categorize, but for the sake of this argument, I'm just going to put it in very black and white terms.
Yeah.
I think people battle with their own yin and yang or masculinity and femininity within themselves.
Yeah.
I know it because I experienced it myself. There was a time period in which I thought I might be non-binary or I might be a trans man because I am so in the middle when it comes to my own energy. I'm going to use masculine and feminine, but I have so much of both energies and they're constantly flowing in and out. But because I present, and this is physical, I present more masculine.
Yes, and that's the proper way of using the word masculine.
Yes, yeah. Because I present more masculine, I think other people expect me to have that yang energy much more than I actually do.
Yes.
Again, I battled with my own gender because I didn't understand that this was a flowing spirit. And now I realize that I'm supposed to be in this avatar. There's a reason that I'm in this physical body. And I'm so comfortable with the fact that I'm a woman who just happens to have this free-flowing energy within
You're
herself.
a great example of exactly what I'm trying to describe, because on the outside, the presentation's more masculine.
Yes.
But you have a ton of yin. You're a very yin-oriented spirit. Your podcast's called Too Sensitive.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming it's because a lot of people have talked to you about that or said that to you, right?
Yeah.
But it's because you have a lot of yin energy, which is a beautiful thing, right? You have a lot of yin energy. So maybe people would assume that you have a ton of yang, where actually you've got a lot of yin.
Yeah.
Which is a beautiful thing. This is why it's different. Masculinity, yin and yang.
Those
right?
are two different things.
Like for me, I would never cut my hair. People have always said, oh, cut your hair shorter, because I have a lot of yang energy. So they would imagine that I want to look more masculine. But no, I love looking androgynous. I love my long hair. I would never cut my hair. That doesn't take away from my yang energy. So this is exactly what I'm talking about. The difference between yin and yang and masculine and femininity.
Yeah, it's very interesting because, again, I feel like, especially within our community, people are battling their own identities within themselves. They're so used to categorizing masculine and feminine. Again, I went through this myself, so I'm speaking from a place of experience. A person who presents more masculine but has a lot of feminine energy is kind of tends to push that feminine energy away and think, I must be man.
Exactly.
Because I'm attracted to this type of person, or because I have this aesthetic that I'm very comfortable with.
Exactly.
I must be man, but it's not that simple.
It's confusing.
Yeah.
It's very confusing, because this is why masculine and feminine have to be understood that they are more physical world representations, because you can want to dress more masculine, want to walk the world in a more masculine kind of with a masculine presentation, but it has nothing to do with whether or not you inside are a dude.
Yes.
Literally.
Well, that's exactly what you are.
So for me, I feel like I naturally have a lot of yang energy, but I also have a lot of yin because I'm deeply empathetic, and I do practice a lot with my intuition. And those are yin qualities, like intuition, psychic, like all of these metaphysical aspects are very yin. And yang is everything else that builds everything together, and is a home energy. It's a strong mountain energy. Yeah, I feel like, very much so, a very two-spirited, right? Like I feel like I'm half man, half woman, genuinely. And I have a lot of yin yang, but I would say my natural orientation is naturally a little bit more yang.
Yeah.
Your natural orientation is just a little more yin.
Mm-hmm. I love the way you describe yourself, because I believe that you were put into this body for a reason, same as myself. I was put into this avatar for a reason. I believe that because I look like this and because I'm in a woman's body, what I say has a lot more conviction. If I were just another white man, I would just be one of the
Nobody would listen
masses.
to you.
Nobody would listen to
Yeah.
me. Yeah, exactly.
And
But-
first of all, if you were a dude, you would be very different. Would you be this empathetic and this integrated with your yin?
Who knows? There's also societal standards at play there, because if I were a man, men are taught not to be emotional. You're taught to suppress your feelings. You're taught that feelings are weakness.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Femininity, yin, you're taught that that's weakness.
Yeah.
So if I were a man, would I be as comfortable with those emotions? Who knows?
Probably not. Look
Probably
at
not.
manosphere. Look at what's happening in the world of the quote unquote alpha, which is the most beta thing I've ever seen in my life.
Oh, yes,
This
for sure.
alpha male thing that's happened, which you see the misogyny is coming back tenfold now. And it is because of figures that are paid, right? You've got these figures that like Andrew Tate, and all these people that are paid to fulfill a certain niche, and look at what they're doing. No, seriously, it's a complete mess. It's truly a complete mess. In fact, I see a lot of traits of abuse. I think abuse rates are going to go up. And I do fear for women sometimes, because it's hard to observe a world that's becoming more and more boxed into dualities, man, woman. Right? Of course, there's people like us that are here to show the middle ground and how these can all play together. And this is why I think queer people have a very important role over the next 30 years, because I do think we're going to see more extremes in every sense.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because I think two things are happening at once. If we look at the political atmosphere, we're getting more and more divided as a country. You've got the extreme right and the extreme left.
More so than before.
More so than before. And the problem with that is that these two groups are the loudest. They've got the microphone. So the people on the left are thinking that the people on the right are evil and vice versa.
Well, it's because these algorithms go back to social media. It's built on algorithms. I don't think that it has anything to do with whether or not you have a good brand at all. This is why I have this kind of relationship with having a public life and a private life that is my own internal conversation, because I'm a very private person, but at the same time, I'm also so transparent, and I have a mission with OHM. So, and I enjoy it. I enjoy actually community and building communities and being out there. But yeah, it's an interesting thing because algorithms are just created based on politics, and politics has a huge effect on culture, and culture is why people think, is what shapes perception.
Yes. Well, politics ties directly into the emotions of individuals, directly into the emotions. And then you see those emotions taking over.
Yes.
But it's interesting because you see these two sides, but most people are actually somewhere in the middle. And you don't get a lot of that representation. It's much more complex than just these two sides. Everything is so nuanced. Nothing is black and white.
And more people would know that they're in the middle if they also had other models of what the middle looks like.
Yes.
There is this thought from the extremes that, you know, being neutral is being complicit. Like, God, that was like some sort of slogan and tagline I used to see.
Yeah, silence is violence.
Silence is violence. Being neutral is complicit. Non-participation is toxic, right? And it's like, okay, just the very nature of these words, like you're proving my point. The fact is you're proving my point. It's like the extremes, the radicals are calling neutrality or non-participation or silence toxic. Now, there are a lot of examples around history. Take MLK, take Gandhi, that were very much so involved in dangerous, extreme political systems where their people were being persecuted and killed, and they were the representations of dealing with it in a third way, which is, okay, not I hate this or I love this, not fight or flight, but how about we confront it with a different energy? And so they are beautiful examples of what I would call non-participation, where they are still participating in a system, but they're doing it by not even engaging in the way that they want them to, right? So the system wants you to engage in specific ways. And if you engage with it in a different way, it breaks the system. Like war, right? War can only happen with the parties involved in the war picking up their guns and their stones and their words and throwing it at each other. It stops if both sides stop. So that's the thing. It's a cycle. It's a flow. It's yin and yang. It continues in a loop. So the only way to stop a loop is to have both parties stop. And sometimes it takes one side to stop first and then the other side to catch up. So what I'm saying is sometimes, yeah, you have to take some hits, but the longer road will be to kind of destabilize and to show that there is another way to deal with things. And at some point, that is when it could stop. So I believe I love politics. I'm not going to lie. I love politics. I love it in that I love observing it and understanding different countries and different systems, because I hate how politics is run. So it's almost interesting. It's like I hate it. I don't participate in it. I don't like it. I want to break it, burn it, and rebuild it. But I have to know so much about it in order to be educated enough to talk about it like that.
I agree with you entirely because I'm also very passionate about it, but it's such a broken system.
It's
and politics
horrific.
Horrific. Politics itself is extremely dark.
Yeah.
Look at the way politicians behave. First of all, you can't trust one as far as you can throw them.
Absolutely not.
But look at the way what's happening right now, the way that politicians behave. It's an extremely dark space to be in.
Yeah. Well, politics is theater, right? It's complete theater. It doesn't actually exist. Here's the interesting part. The whole world is actually definitely run by a few very, very ultra wealthy companies. So let's think about this.
7.
Let's think about this, right? Let's play the whole thing out. You have a team. You know, you're a manager of a team, right? The team gets bigger, you know, then you have to have other managers under you. You become like a director. it gets bigger, it gets bigger, it gets bigger. All of a sudden you have millions of people that are kind of underneath you. You're like the president, right? And then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So there's always somebody above. There's always someone above, and there's always a silent player above. So we're all having opinions and beating up each other online based on layer number 12, So yeah, basically the point is that these are actors, and also it's been proven. So the reason I can't take politics seriously is that it's been proven that certain players are actors, or certain people are completely, corrupt in a very, very dark and sick manner. Those things have been proven, which for me is enough to crumble my confidence in the entire system itself. I am aware of politics. I like to understand it, but I know it's not real. So I don't want to participate and have too much of an emotional attachment to any one person or to any one party or to any one side or perspective, because I would just be feeding something that I already know is false.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point.
If we know what we know today about things that have come up, then what are we doing? Why are we continuing to talk about this person and that person? And we have enough information public that should already destabilize the system. We have enough of us to say, no, it's true.
Yeah.
So that's how I've kind of always felt.
I agree entirely.
That's how you and I bonded, 2020.
That's how you and I bonded.
That was one of the most freak shows we've ever seen.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But again, I think emotions are so interesting. And this goes back to what you were saying about the yin and the yang.
Yeah.
Because people associate emotion with yin, femininity, right?
Oh, yeah.
And then people associate yang with stoicism.
Yeah, which is the opposite of what I just told you.
Yeah.
Yin is stillness. And
inward.
yang is action. So it's the opposite of what we're describing masculine and feminine.
It is. We are just human beings.
Yeah.
And again, emotion really does come into play here, especially when
Absolutely.
when you're dealing with these issues and something that directly affects people, like
Yes.
finances. That's a direct tie to a state of emotion within a person. So when you're speaking about something like finances, it's very easy for that emotion to take over on one side or the other. It can just cloud your judgment entirely. When your emotions take over, and I'm guilty of this as well, not just in the political atmosphere, but in my daily life, if an emotion takes over, it's like all of my logic goes completely out the window. It is the human condition.
And I love talking about the human, like the human experience that we're walking, because we have to respect and have grace for ourselves.
Yes.
And because we can know something, we can have a higher knowledge, a higher awareness of how things should be, how we should behave, how we should react. But our human has to genuinely go through that process to get there.
Yes.
Because it is possible for the human to elevate in that they can feel an emotion, but they can not be emotionally attached to that emotion. So it's possible to overcome and not feel a certain way when that same trigger happens.
Yeah.
But in the moment, if you feel triggered, I get it. I think people should do a lot of self-talk to try to kind of bring them to a different place. But sometimes the human is just the human, and they just have to experience it. And quite frankly, that's the most important thing, I think, is just let yourself be human and then let others be human.
Well, this goes into a video I made the other day, which is you can be so self-aware, but self-awareness can also look like policing your own feelings if you go too far with it. If you feel something and in your head you're going, well, I shouldn't feel this way, I shouldn't react this way, you start a shame spiral. So you're shaming yourself for feeling the feeling instead of actually letting the feeling move through you and out of your system. But I was also talking about this with you. I could be so self-aware and I could be so aligned, and then my dad says something to me and I turn into a child again.
Look, parents have a very unique role in our lives. Like,
It's
I
true.
think, yeah, it's kind of funny.
It's true. But I do believe that we have to allow ourselves to feel, because the only way out is through.
Yeah. Yes. And like, as with everything, it's nuanced. As with everything, it's gray. Because yes, of course, there are some emotions like sadness, heartbreak, where you just gotta lay on the
sit in
floor,
that.
cry that out, feel the loneliness, feel the abandonment, feel anything you're feeling, because you're trying to harmonize these qualities inside you. Half the time, you're dragging on a certain wound, right? You're dragging it throughout your life because you're never fully allowing yourself to address it in the mirror and by yourself. Like, for example, last year was a very solo year for me, 2025. very solo. I was kind of breaking myself out of a certain fantasy I had. And I was trying to get really rooted in the 3D and like reality. I really, really felt the depths of the like loneliness. And I realized like when I actually let myself drop, let the vibration drop, let the emotion come out, like just drop it, feel lonely, let the soul feel lonely, cry it out. And I just remember doing this and actually like releasing the emotion. I released it so much that it, like even out like me outside of myself, observing myself felt bad for me, right? It was that much.
Yeah.
But it was so freaking profound, so profound because the next day my energy shot up and it changed. Like something changed. You know how sometimes you just wake up and something shifts?
Yes.
You know, and that's because the other night you released, right? Released. I felt like that. That was really powerful.
Yeah.
And that's an example of just feeling the feeling, right? Now, here's another example. Someone pisses you off and you want to punch them in the face. You should self-talk. Maybe not do
You should not do that.
Maybe not do that, right? So not every emotion deserves and is entitled to expression. So you can feel something, but that doesn't mean that it's entitled to expression. Like if you don't like a certain race, oh, I don't like Indian people. I mean, it's crazy when I see some of the stuff online about Indian culture. Like, but some of these things don't need to be expressed.
Yes.
They need to be worked through internally.
Yeah, logically. But that's still feeling the feeling, in my opinion. Anger is such an interesting emotion. It's usually tied to something deeper. Anger is just the first thing you feel, quote unquote. I don't even know if it's a real emotion. Anger is just a mask.
Yeah, I think anger is compounding resistance. It's almost like the emotion that happens after you've ignored other emotions first.
Yes.
It's like other emotions probably happened of like feeling hurt, feeling betrayed, feeling insecure, feeling embarrassed. And then it turns into just anger. Like, and this is what I see manosphere.
Yeah, this is manosphere.
This is manosphere. It's like they're all pissed off at women because they think that no one's respecting them enough. For what? I don't know, but that's what it is. It's that.
And it ties into men suppressing their emotions.
Yes,
like
exactly.
you were saying.
Exactly.
Every single emotion of hurt, pain, heartbreak is getting suppressed, and it's manifesting into anger.
Yeah.
But when something happens in the moment, this is why I said anger is the first thing you feel. When something happens in the moment, it immediately pisses you off.
Yes.
And then you go into this state of rage. But I do think that what you said is still feeling the feeling, and it still needs to move through
it's just
you
a different
and out of your
expression of it.
system. Yeah, you can feel something and logic your way out of it, or you can just let yourself crumble. It depends on what you're feeling.
You can feel it and express it outwardly, which is like what I did with the loneliness example, or you can feel it and express it internally
yes.
and just deal with it internally. These are both forms of expression.
Yeah, I don't believe in bleeding onto other people. Something that I tried to do to the best of my abilities, I'm not going to lie, sometimes it bleeds out onto my family. It does. My family does bear the brunt of that from time to time. Because like I said, my dad will say something and I'll turn into my inner child.
Well, he's
comes out.
such a perfect person in your life to really bring up every single trigger.
Yes.
Because now you have a choice. You're going to express that externally or internally or both.
Yeah, or both.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I truly believe in not bleeding your emotions onto other people. Communicating effectively is very different than outward emotion towards an external figure. I believe that emotions are so personal. You have to feel it. Even expressing loneliness and letting yourself cry, that's still internal work. Yes, it's outward, but it's still internal work. I don't believe in bleeding that out onto somebody else. Because if you were feeling that loneliness and say there was another person present and you were just like, get out of my space, that's bleeding your emotions onto another person. That's projection.
That's pretty much the definition of projection. Like projection is when you're like something's happening internally, and instead of fully dealing with it internally and kind of owning that this is something that you're processing and dealing with internally, you project it out onto other people.
Yes, and projecting those strong emotions out onto other people is not something that I agree with. I do believe that you should be able to communicate your feelings in a logical way. Hey, I'm feeling this way. I might need to take some space or put up a boundary, whatever that may be. Or just say it to say it. Not everything has to lead to a boundary. Just say, hey, I'm making you aware of this thing that I'm feeling. That's very different than projection.
Entirely. And also speaking out through your emotions and sharing like how you're feeling isn't the same as reaction. So, emotional, you can be emotional, you can feel angry, but you don't have to react. You can just express via communication and words. And that actually can sometimes help.
Yeah, it does help. I find that whenever rage takes over my body, it's so simple, but if I just take a deep breath, it expels the anger and then logic comes into play.
Well, that's nice. That I would say, a lot of people probably would have different steps involved. Like,
It depends on how angry
for me,
I am.
I have to go for a walk. I need to move it out. So that's where my yang energy comes in, because rage is very charged. It's a really charged emotion. It, like you can feel it up and down, right? And sometimes I have to go walk. I have to like do some movement. But of course, always there is that period of having to reflect and to meditate and genuinely kind of transmute, right? Change the energy inside yourself. So now you see this connection between yin and yang, and like how there's always a little bit of everything in each other.
Yes.
And that's life. And so as more we can understand the nuances of that and how it's not this or that, masculine or feminine, yin or yang, but it's like this mishmash of how it all feeds each other. The easier understanding how things work, or how understanding how things are, how other people are, it becomes better.
You touched on this earlier, but I want you to expand on it. What role do you think queer people play into this?
Oh my gosh. Well, I think that queer people are the example of the gray. Like, we are the example of the nuance. We're the physical world form of nuance for people. Most people need to see something, hear something, experience something to understand it exists. So I think that queer people can hold the energy, hold the space, right? Balance out the energy of the entire world. And I think that it's very important. Queer people play a hugely important role. And it does hurt me when I see a lot of queer people that, or just looking at the community at large, and how these conversations aren't the majority of conversations that we're having, because they really should be. We are a community that needs a lot of healing. There are a lot of mental health issues. There's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of trauma. And
Substance abuse.
And the reason is because we're born into a world, and immediately there's shame put on us, and there's all these boxes put on us. Imagine a baby, or a child or a kid or a teenager having all that shame and projection put on them. What the heck do you think is going to happen? So the community does have a lot of these, kind of mental health battles for a reason. So there's nothing to judge. We shouldn't judge that. We should state that and actually understand that and have grace that, wow, we're so important, and we should really help each other through this. And respect that our healing and our well-being is the number one most important thing. And yeah, I think mental health is talked about a lot, but I almost think the mental health is different than what I'm talking about. We're talking about
We're talking about deep trauma.
Yeah, we're talking about
shame.
deep soul level stuff.
Yeah, we're talking about very deep levels of shame. You and I were having this conversation the other day, but I thought the way you explained it was perfect. When you're a child, especially a child like you and I, and you're shoved into a dress when all you want is to put on some basketball shorts, it feels like such an attack on the soul.
Oh my God.
And it's small technically, but not really.
No, it's
You're
not small.
shoving a story into that child's head, which is one of the reasons I dealt with such intense levels of shame, especially as a teenager. I had known I was gay from a very, very young age. It was a soul thing. Well, it entered my conscious being when I was 5. I didn't know what it was. You and I are very
similar in that way.
Yeah. I didn't know exactly what it was. I didn't know society was going to deem it incorrect, but I knew that I was different. I knew that I was attracted to women from a very, very young age. I was shoved into a box at a very young age as well. Granted, my mom, for the most part, gave up on that pretty quickly, and she let me be me. For the most part, there were still some instances where I was forced to wear a dress, and it just felt like an attack on a cage. It felt like an attack on my person. I remember this, actually. It's one of my first memories. When I was 3 years old, I was the flower girl at my cousin's wedding.
Freaking adorable.
It was adorable.
Who wants to see Juliet as a flower girl? I do.
There's a photo of it somewhere. I don't know. But I remember it because it was so traumatic in a way. I was 3 years old, and my parents forced me out. I had this Gap sweatshirt that I never took off. It was a ugly, disgusting yellow, but my parents forced me out of that and into a dress, and I threw the biggest
Yeah.
temper tantrum.
And how old are you?
I was 3. And I remember this. I was in my mom's closet and she was fighting me, trying to put me in this dress. I was just like,
That's
why
so
do
sad.
It's so sad. And I was like, why do I have to wear this?
I know. I know.
I don't understand. You're freaking a child out.
100%. So I have very similar experiences.
Yeah.
Like for me, it was like the picture days were the worst. Birthdays were the worst. It was the worst because they were amazing people. They were trying to give me gifts. But they were girl gifts, right? They were not the gifts that I wanted. Or picture day, right? Forcing me into like a skort, right? Even a skort. I was like, I don't want this.
Yeah.
But truly, it's traumatizing. You lose trust in your parents because like someone's doing something that like is against your will.
Yes.
And it feels like an assault.
It does.
Right? Because it feels like you're being held down. And actually, in fact, like that's what parents do, right? They're not doing it to try to assault their kids, but hey, we gotta go. The car's coming in 5 minutes. Put on the shirt and let's go, right?
Yeah.
So they're forcing it physically on you. They're holding you down sometimes, right? Putting pants and shirts and whatever. And that's pretty scary of an experience for a child.
Yes.
A lot of us go through that experience, which is the reason why there is a wounding that happens. There's a insecurity. Because it's embarrassing, right? Now let's talk about the embarrassment. Now you're walking out there basically feeling like you're cross-dressing.
Yes.
And people are like, ooh, you're
so
so
cute.
good. And you're like, I hate this reality right now, right? And it's embarrassing. So what happens when you have embarrassment that you need to swallow and not express? What happens when you have mistrust between someone that you thought was safe, which is your family, and you have to shove that down? Now that can turn into some anger. Now that can turn into some escapism. Mm-hmm. And there's a reason why a lot of us, when we first come out and we go to gay bars, what are we doing? Drinking ourselves to oblivion. I did that. That was my 20s. I was very hedonistic, and I went out there and I was partying a ton. And yes, it was fun, but in reality, I damaged my body quite a bit. We have to acknowledge this. And I think let's accept the fact that we are a very traumatized community and that the politics that is then put on this traumatized community does not help. Saying, okay, well, now everybody in this community is supposed to believe this way or that way or this way or that way. And now all of a sudden you see the cancel culture and the attacking inside. So we become the abusers of each other, right? So
yeah,
it hurts me when I see and hear the statistic about lesbian relationships and
they're
domestic violence that's involved.
They're the highest, for context. Lesbian relationships have the highest statistical level of domestic violence in any relationship.
And of course, it's not something that like is fun to talk about because at the same time, it's like, wow, it's not what we want to be known for. But we need to accept something to fix it first.
Yes.
So,
we need to accept it as reality.
And you can see why. It's because there's so much that's inside that's not expressed or talked about or, counseled properly. Because it's not just about identity. It's not just about feeling proud of your label and proud of who you are. It's what's the impact of your sexuality on your soul? Yes, being proud of who you are is absolutely the highest importance, but it's not the only thing that's involved with being queer.
Yes.
We have a lot of other things that like, if we just focus on being proud, we forget everything else that happened to us. But and this is why other communities kind of use that against us. Mm-hmm. This is why you see straight men that don't take lesbians seriously or bisexual or gay, right? This is not just about lesbians, but you see some people in the straight community that don't take us seriously or think that we are evil or think that we are demonic. Again, they're projections, and we can go absolutely into that community and all the projections there. But we need to all take responsibility for who we are and what has happened to us. And I do remember the first time I probably sat with like, oh, wow, this is how I actually felt when I was little.
Yeah.
Going back to the story I shared about like letting my soul express the loneliness. I had this flash of me when I was like 4 or 5 or 6 during the peak like expression moment. And I realized in that moment that the last time I felt that lonely was that age.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, me at whatever I was last year, however age, was feeling into me at like 4. And that was the last time I felt that level of loneliness. And then I had this visualization of like me holding my little saw, literally. And then I had the knowing, because I have a knowing of my spiritual path, right? That there's a higher version of me that's also holding me now. So there's this really beautiful kind of 4D generational like visualization I did. And that resulted in the next day me completely feeling differently. Like my energy was different and I felt really high, really high. And I'm so glad that I had that moment.
Well, you held your inner child, which is what we all need to do.
Yes.
That's more than just a spiritual practice. I think we all need to do that, because when these feelings come up, it's really just the child within you that's screaming and begging for attention.
Yeah.
And just begging for a hug.
And nobody can take care of that child except for ourselves.
Yes.
And this is where we have to take the responsibility. And of course, you want to have partners and people around you that can help support you as you hold your own self. But we have to remember, it's our responsibility first. It's not any person around us that needs to make us feel a certain level of self-esteem. You know, it's not anybody around us, because we live in a world that, for all intents and purposes, is meant to kind of bring us down.
Yes.
Because we're supposed to build the character to build us up.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Actually, I want to go back to something you said about the queer community and the fact that we are such a traumatized community. I believe that there's so much, it comes out in the form of cancel culture, and we all have to think a certain way, like a hive mind. It does come out in that way, but I also think there's so much internal competition between us all. Another thing that's very interesting about what's happening in this day and age is that people are making being queer their entire personality. I did that when I first came out because I needed to. I needed to let it consume me because I had so much shame in who I was. I needed to go through that in order to realize that it was okay.
Yeah.
And now I've come full circle to the point where it is such a small aspect of who I am as an individual. It really is.
Yeah.
I genuinely believe that it's the least interesting thing about me.
It's definitely one of the most influential, because it definitely influences your whole perception of how you see the world. Mm-hmm. But the reality is it's a very small part of you and me. I haven't been to Pride Parade in 8+ years. I haven't really engaged in the community. I am now, but that's because I feel very different. I just have grown. Honestly, I've just grown. And I do think that it's, so I'm really looking forward to diving back in to the community, right? Because of this exact reason.
I think you might feel similarly to me, but I believe that it needs so much healing. Yeah. And I feel like I have to take on that responsibility for some reason. Not the entire responsibility of healing the entire community. That's insane. But if I can help one person feel a little less lonely or a little less shameful, I'm doing something right.
Of course, because you've gone through the evolution, and I think it's a pay it forward. So I feel that I have to pay it forward because I've gone through a heavy, heavy transformation from the most opposite qualities you can imagine to now this version that you're meeting and seeing. But I was the opposite in every way. I was very, very detached from my emotions. I was very black-hearted. I was very non-committal, like all these things. And now it's like, these principles of integrity and loyalty and faithfulness and all these communication, transparency, these are the only things that matter to me, because these are such a core part of my own being. But yeah, as what happens when you are traumatized from young and grow and have other traumatizing experiences, because life does that. So you're just compounding on top of the queer thing. Yeah. Now it's life, family, school, relationships. It's just stuff happens, right? Mm-hmm. Stuff happens. So it becomes a compounding effect. So the way that my younger self kind of handled it was pure escapism. Mm-hmm. Pure escapism. Yeah. And now I'm just such a big proponent of the opposite. And that's why I feel like I need to pay it forward. And just by being. And I think that's a great thing for everyone. Everyone should pay it forward. So we're not doing anything differently. We're just doing it in the way that we feel we can.
Yeah, I agree. It was like a message from the universe, but I felt the need to ask you this question. Where do you think God comes into play with the way you've shifted your mindset and your value system?
Huge. The core. Yeah, the core. But I have such an interesting relationship with my spirituality because how do I start? I was born in an Indian family, right? I'm an Indian. My background is Indian, Bengali specifically, and we're Hindus. And I grew up in a very Christian world because it was the 90s, and America's foundation is very Christian, very Abrahamic. And I was born and raised in New York City, Greek and Italian, neighborhood, went to a church for preschool, went to a Jesuit school for university. So I was very much around Abrahamic principles and, kind of culture. And I was a first generation, right? So my parents are immigrants and they've worked super hard to get here. And so when you're first generation, you're kind of the bridge. You're the bridge. You're the bridge between your parents and reality. And I had to very much so assimilate. And because I knew that I had a queer identity from very young, and Indian culture is not necessarily
conducive to that.
Conducive to that today. Indian culture is pretty gay from the past, but today it's very conservative thanks to the British colonialization and all this other stuff. But yeah, I felt much more comfortable around Americans, white people, than anybody else, because what I did appreciate a lot about American culture is that they do allow for expression. Everything has pros and cons, but I'm very grateful for America because I wouldn't have been able to be me, become me, and become, have my style and the things that I know that I like and don't like. I wouldn't have been able to really explore that if I was born anywhere else.
Yeah, I agree.
So we have to give credit where credit's due, and that is 100% like credit of being born in America. So I was very detached from my culture. And I would go to the temple with my family and I would see the rituals and all this stuff, never understood what it was about. But I always felt connected to something. I was always a very, kind of philosopher in my head. So I felt connected to spirituality. So like back then I didn't know the language, but it's basically, agnostic spirituality, pantheistic, kind of understanding that the earth and the world and everything's kind of connected to yourself. That's pantheism. Pantheism is the worshiping of the earth and animals and the stars just as much as you, and knowing that you're connected. And then later in life, I really understood Hinduism, and I was like, wow, mic drop. Like Hinduism is just a mic drop. And the entire thing is intergalactic. It's cosmic. It's very much so pantheistic. And it's one of the only ancient faith systems that still exists today at its scale. So it was a very, very beautiful thing to get reconnected to my roots later on in life. And I went to India 8 times in 3 years, and I really just dove back into my roots. And of course, people came along the way that really helped facilitate that exploration back home. And so that was very beautiful. So I got very connected with spirituality and specifically the Vedic path. In Hinduism, we have many different deities. It's a monotheistic religion, right? So it's a monotheistic faith system, but we have all of these different forms. Kali, Lakshmi, Ganesh, right? Shiva, Krishna. We've got all these different forms, and all these different forms represent a different aspect of the human experience. Compassion, removal of obstacles, fire, deconstruction. They all have different kind of personalities, you could say. So I felt very connected to Shiva, because Shiva is half man, half woman. Well, also I should say this, every deity in Hinduism is half man, half woman. So Hinduism is very queer. Hinduism is very fluid. Everything is very, very much so like we morph into each other. Like every single god has a male and female version of itself. And again, it's genderless at the end of the day. So that really helped. And I will say, of course, I don't come from an Abrahamic background. I live in an Abrahamic country, and I was very much so kind of pushed into a box to kind of try to become that. But that's not my DNA roots. So that helped. And I do think that looking at other faith systems across the world can help also the queer community, right?
Yeah.
This is why Buddhism exploded in the Western world. Hinduism exploded into the Western world because the Eastern way is very different. Mm-hmm. It's very different. So God and energy, Shiva, Phoenix, Gaia, whatever you want to call it, plays an absolute huge integral part of my life now.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. I relate to a lot of what you're saying. I don't identify as Hindu. I don't know much about the religion beyond what you've told me, but I was raised Jewish, and that was interesting because I call myself Jewish.
Yeah.
Ish. I didn't really have that much of a religious upbringing, but I did go to Catholic school for middle school and high school. So I was also shoved, so to speak, into the Abrahamic religions, and I had that put upon me. I was lucky in that I wasn't raised in a religious household. Religion wasn't shoved down my throat. Even my middle school, high school was fairly liberal when it came to the teachings of the Bible, theology. You could express yourself a little bit more than a typical religious upbringing in the middle of the South.
Yes.
So that being said, I still understand what religious shame can do to a queer person. Mine was very minor.
Huge.
The community at large takes issue with God, spirituality, obviously, because we've had that trauma shoved down our throats.
Abrahamic religions have projected a lot upon the queer community, and it's just factual. It is what it is. Of course, I think the teachings of Jesus Christ are the complete opposite of that. I think Jesus Christ is extremely fluid, very feminine, masculine man.
For sure.
Very yin oriented,
All
extremely yin, like pretty much all yin, all yin man. Beautiful example of fluidity and just being true to your nature of a soul, which is balanced. So I think Jesus Christ is very different than the teachings of the church.
Yes.
And so therefore this is where it gets a little bit confusing and controversial, but it is true. The queer community has been very much so projected upon from specifically those religions.
Yeah. And he saw all individuals as equal and deserving of love, which is also ironic considering what the church teaches us we are.
And also the Bible's been mistranslated. So we know that for a fact. We know that there have been words that have come up that have shown that actually the real ancient like Hebrew that was said this, not that. So we know that the foundations of the Bible can be called into question because we don't know what exactly it really said originally.
Yeah, for sure. Yes, it's definitely been proven that the Bible has been mistranslated. It's just very interesting because I think that's one of the reasons that queer people find themselves in situations where they're escaping. Very hedonistic. Again, I did this too. It's no judgment. I still do it from time to time. I still catch myself in those moments and I'm like, oh, I need to realign myself spiritually. But I also know that that's a part of me that I can put into a box. That's my human. I can put that into a little box.
You're such a Capricorn.
Just...
But, you know, most queer people are pantheistic. Most queer people are very metaphysical. Lesbians are known stereotypically of being the witches because it's true.
Obsession with astrology.
It's true because queer people are naturally spiritual. Here's the thing. Queer people are natural born healers in so many ways, and it's been shown in ancient societies. Instead of the word ancient, I kind of like to use the word original. Like original societies, original civilizations. They all had very magical ways of being. You know, they all studied astrology. They all studied the stars. They all had holidays based around the stars. You know, you go from Gnosticism, you go to Hinduism, you go Sufism, you go Kabbalah. Like, it doesn't matter. Anywhere, Native American, everywhere across the world, they all studied a form of pantheism. And queer people, a lot of them are pantheistic.
What I'm trying to say, and what I might not be explaining that well, is that it is kind of ironic that a lot of queer people go to escapism and they reject the idea of spirituality and God entirely because they think that's the thing that's going to make them heal. I have found within myself that when I rejected that ideology, I was a mess. But when I invited that in, it allowed myself to heal.
Yeah.
And accept myself for who I truly am. Not just in my queer identity, but it allowed me to be more comfortable with myself in general. I think there's so much healing that can be done to the inner soul when you invite that in. It doesn't have to look like an Abrahamic religion. I don't follow an Abrahamic religion.
It's
Being Jewish is more cultural. Yeah, it's
you're
spirituality.
Talking about spirituality.
Yes.
So this is how I want to contribute to the queer community. I want to have more dialogues around spirituality because it's been such an incredibly beautiful experience for me. Had so many highs, so many lows, and that's the spiritual path. It's like really leaning into your lows because you end up changing your entire life when you do.
Yeah, for sure.
So this is how I want to contribute, is have conversations like this about spirituality, because spirituality simply is expanded awareness. It's more perspectives. It's more holistic. That's all it is. Like, it's understanding of yourself. And through understanding yourself more, you can understand others. And then all of a sudden you have such an expanded view of how things are. And the more you can understand and have grace for the human, for your human self, the more grace you have for others, which then makes you more compassionate. And that's where that more kind of universal love energy comes naturally. And that's spirituality. So I think it's incredibly important that the queer community has more dialogues on spirituality. So thanks for bringing this up.
Yeah, I think so too. I'm just going to ask you this point blank. Do you have any closing statements or something that you want your audience to know?
Jesus Christ. Do you have any closing statements?
Do you have any closing statements? Do you
Om
have
Namah Shivaya.
Yeah.
That's my closing statement.
Yeah. Something you think would benefit this audience. Think of the first thing that comes to mind.
Innately just walking through the human experience and being as human as possible is the actual path of spirituality. So where do you start? You just start by actually being human, allowing yourself to be human as much as possible.
That's great. That's a good closing statement. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Love you.
Love you.